Stories of Futures Past presents 10 short stories, also known as Flash Fiction, Volume 3. 2 plus 2 Makes Crazy by Walt Sheldon. The Natives by Katherine MacLean. The Old Goat by Charles L. Fontenay. Guest Expert by Alan Kim Lang. Utopia, Never by Thomas M. Disch. Birthday Present by Arnold Marmor. Earth's Gone to the Dogs by William J. McClellan. Homecoming Horde by Robert Silverberg. Task to Luna by Alfred Coppel. The Legacy by Dick Hank. 2 plus 2 Makes Crazy by Walt Sheldon. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, March 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The little man had a head like an old-fashioned light bulb, and a smile that seemed to say he had secrets from the rest of the world. He didn't talk much, just an occasional "oh," or "ah." Creighton figured he must be all right, though. After all, he'd been sent to Computer City by the Information Department itself, and his credentials must have been checked in 100 ways and places. "Essentially, each computer is the same," said Creighton, "but adjusted to translate problems into the special terms of the division it serves." Creighton had a pleasant, well-behaved, impersonal voice. He was in his 30s and mildly handsome. He considered himself a master of the technique of building a career in Computer City. He knew how to stay within the limits of directives and regulations and still make decisions, or rather, to relay computer decisions that kept his responsibility to a minimum. Now Creighton spoke easily and freely to the little man. As public liaison officer, he had explained the computer system hundreds of times. He knew it like a tech manual. "But is there any real central control, say in case of a breakdown or something of that sort?" The little man's voice was dry as lava ash, dry as the wastes between and beyond the cities. Tanter was the name he had given, Mr. Tanter. His contact lenses were so thick they made his eyes seem to bulge grotesquely. He had a faint stoop and wore a black tunic which made him look like one of the reconstructed models of prehistoric birds called crows that Creighton had seen in museums. Of course," said Creighton, answering the question. "It's never necessary to use the all circuit, but we could very easily in case of a great emergency." "The all circuit? What is that?" Mr. Tanter asked. Creighton gestured and led the little man down the long control bank. Their steps made precise clicks on the layer-plast floor. The stainless steel walls threw back tinny echoes. The chromium moulding listened, always pointing the way, the straight and mathematical way. They were in the topmost section of the topmost building of Computer City. The several hundred clean, solid, wedding cake structures of the town could be seen from the Polarflex window. "The all circuit puts every machine in the city to work on any selection problem that's fed into our master control here. Each machine will give its answer in its own special terms, but actually they will all work on the same problem. To use a grossly simple example, let us say we wish to know the results of 2 and 2, but we wish to know it in terms of total security. That is, we wish to know that 2 plus 2 means twice as many nourishment units for the Department of Foods, twice as many weapons for the Department of War, but is perhaps not necessarily true according to the current situational adjustment in the Department of Public Information. At any rate, we would set up a problem on the master, pushing the button 2, and then the button plus, and the button 2 again, as on a primitive adding machine. Then we would merely throw the all switch. A short time later, the total answer to our problem would be relayed back from every computer and the cross-comparison factors cancelled out, so that we would have the result in terms of the familiar verdict statement. And as everyone knows, the electronically filed verdict statements make the complete record of directives for the behaviour of our society. "Very interesting," said Mr. Tanter, the little crow-like man. He blinked rapidly, stared at the switch marked all that Creighton was pointing out to him. Creighton now folded his hands in front of his official golden-black tunic, looked up into the air, and rocked gently back and forth on his heels as he talked. He was really talking to himself now, although he seemed to address Tanter. "You can see that the computer system is quite under our control in spite of what these rebellious underground groups say." "Underground groups?" asked Mr. Tanter mildly. Just his left eye seemed to blink this time, and the edge of his mouth gave the veriest twitch. "Oh, you know," said Creighton. "The organization that calls itself the Prims. Prim for primitive. They leave little cards and pamphlets around damning the computer system. I saw one the other day. It had a big title splashed across it. Our New Tyrant, the Computer. The article complained that some of the new labor and food regulations were the result of conscious reasoning on the part of the computer. Devices to build the computer bigger and bigger and bigger at the expense of ordinary workers. You know the sort of thing." "But it is true that the living standard is going down all the time, isn't it?" asked Mr. Tanter, keeping his ephemeral smile. "What about those 3,000 starvation deaths up in Hydraberg?" Creighton waved an impatient hand. "There will always be problems like that here and there." He turned and stared almost reverently at the long control rack. "Be thankful we have the computer to solve them." "But the deaths were due to diverting that basic carbon shipment down here to Computer City for computer building, weren't they?" "Now there, you see how powerful the propaganda of the Prims can be?" Creighton put his hands on his hips. "That statement is not true. It simply isn't true at all. It was analyzed on the computer some days ago. Here, let me show you." He took several steps down the corridor again and stopped at another panel. "We first collected from the various departments, food, production, labor, and so forth, all the possible causes of the starvation deaths in Hydraberg. Computer administration had its machine translate them into symbols. We're getting a huge new plant and machine addition over at administration, by the way. At any rate, we simply registered all the possible causes with the master computer, then threw in this circuit marked Validity Selector. Out of all those causes, the computer picked the one that was most valid. The Hydraberg tragedy was due to lack of foresight on the part of Hydraberg's planners. If they'd had a proper stockpile of basic carbon, the thing never would have happened." "But no community ever stockpiles," said the little man. "That," said Creighton, "doesn't alter the fundamental fact. The computer never lies." He drew himself up stiffly as he said this. Then abruptly he consulted the chronometer on the far wall. "Excuse me just a moment, Mr. Tanter," he said. "It's time to feed the daily tax computation from finance. We have to start a little early on that these days. The new taxes, you know." As Creighton moved off, Tanter's thin smile widened just a little. As soon as Creighton was out of sight, he stepped with his odd crow-like stride to the numerical panel, punched 2 + 2, then adjusted the operations pointer to hold. After that, he punched 3 + 1, and hold once more. He moved over to the validity selector, switched the numerical panel in, closed the circuit. In his dry voice he murmured to the whole control rack. 3 + 1 makes 4. 2 + 2 makes 4. 3 + 1, 2 + 2. Tell me which is really true. All through the master computer relays clicked and tubes glowed as the problem was sent to all the subcomputers in their own special terms. Food, production, labor, public information, war, peace, education, science, and so forth. All over Computer City the solenoids moved their contacts and the filaments turned cherry red. Oscillating circuits hummed silently to themselves in perfect cue. The life warmth of hysteresis pulsed and throbbed along wires and channels. 3 + 1, 2 + 2. Tell me which is really true. The problem crisscrossed in and out, around, about, checking, cross-checking, rechecking, as the computer thought about the problem. Which was really true? Even before Creighton returned, parts of the computer had begun to get red-hot. It hummed in some places, and in the other places relays going back and forth in indecision made an unhealthily rattling noise. Little Mr. Tanter beamed happily to himself as he recalled the words of an old directive the computer itself had issued in the matter of public thought control. When a brain is faced with two absolutely equal alternatives, complete breakdown invariably results. Mr. Tanter kept smiling and rocked back and forth on his feet as Creighton had done. Before nightfall, the computer would be a useless and overheated mass of plastic and metal. He took a printed folder from his pocket and casually dropped it on the floor where someone would be sure to find it. It was one of the pamphlets the Prims were always leaving around. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The Natives by Katherine MacLean. Originally published in Science Fiction Stories, 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The Old One said, "Stick close by me, child." "What'll it be like, Grandpa?" The youngster was frightened. "Dark, very dark, and big. It moves fast, but we'll keep up with it." The tone was consciously reassuring. "Dark, Grandpa?" "Yes, it sucks heat and absorbs light. You'll find out when you're old and strong enough to swim down to the bottom and see what's there. Now stay with me when we follow it, and don't get lost in the crowd, and don't get ahead of me or get too close to it. You might take in too much and get overcharged." "What's overcharged, Grandpa? Can you really get too much?" The youngster jigged up and down a little with excitement and anticipation. For a moment the oldster turned his attention from watching for the thing that was coming, and considered him fondly. "Poor youngling, I forget. You've had no chance to learn what it means to get enough. You're too young to ride the storms and tap the lightnings. Listen now. When a grown-up has to let out a flash of blue light, that means he's overcharged and spinning off balance inside, and so he has to save himself by letting out his energy to let down the pressure. So be careful. Take enough, but don't be greedy and take in too much too suddenly. Now let's just float here with the others and be ready." It was a beautiful, bright day. The sun poured down its flood of light, here and there energizing a molecule of the blue air into little sparkles of ionization, and below, a mist of bright clouds half veiled the darkness that was the bottom. "What's it mean when someone blinks blue lights in lots of flashes and then glows red and starts sinking, huh, Grandpa?" "I'll tell you later when you're older. Just be careful and don't get too close." He was abruptly excited. "Here it comes!" Out of the blue translucence far below, a black dot appeared and grew rapidly, rushing closer until it was a huge fish-shaped object with widespread fins, rushing towards them. It would pass slightly to the left of them, and already the waiting crowd was moving to intercept it. It flashed by, and the youngster thought they were going to lose it. It was going so much faster than they. But as the thought crossed his mind, and he saw the two churning, glowing openings in its rear, a burning blast of energy struck him. A multitude of glowing, charged particles crackled around him, streamed against him. His fields shifted to reach out and capture them. The spin of stored energy within spun faster, absorbing the new energy into its drive, its life pulse rising to a deep hum, and he felt strong, stronger than he had ever felt before in his life. They were flying faster now, accelerating faster than he had ever flown, and it was easy. They drew up closer to the dark thing, matching it speed for speed, laving in the glowing cloud of energy particles that roared backward from its jets. The youngster was astounded and exhilarated at the tremendous, effortless speed with which they were driving forward. This was the first time he had ever had so much power. It was 10 times more than any aurora borealis with its pale wash of energy waves. Drunken in his newfound strength, he pulled ahead closer to the roaring jets. At the peak of the arc of climb of the New York-Istanbul stratoliner, high in the ionosphere where the Earth was merely a giant globe far below, the pilot of the stratoliner boldly cut the jets for the fuel-saving glide that turned their nose toward Earth again. The radar was clanging its usual senseless warning of imminent collision with some solid objects which had approached closer than the automatic relays considered safe. It had been clanging for several minutes. The pilot glanced in annoyance at the radar screen where several hundred globes, from 2 to 7 feet in diameter, showed vividly trailing the ship in a fan-shaped cluster. "Someday I'm going to take a hammer to that thing." The co-pilot, looking back from the control blister's rear window, saw nothing as usual, except a few of the shining globes which showed themselves transiently in a brief flash of blue light as they carelessly overloaded and discharged, and one, smaller than the rest, who blinked on and off in rapidly brilliant flashes of blue. As he watched, it ran suddenly down the color scale to red and began to lag behind, a glowing red globe, sinking. "I wonder what the hell they think they're doing," he grumbled. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The Old Goat by Charles L. Fontenay. Originally published in Worlds of If Science Fiction, February 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Dr. Angstrom was known to his students and many of his colleagues on the faculty as the Old Goat. Very appropriate, that name. He had the disposition of a goat with dyspepsia. He had the cold blue eyes of a goat. He had the waggling whiskers of a goat. Perhaps it's in memory of Dr. Angstrom that Ivy College has a goat for its mascot now. Dr. Angstrom was even more goatish than usual that day last summer, when half a dozen top scientists in the field gathered to see his preview experiment on matter transmission of a live animal. He had been working hard for weeks on the transmitter and keeping up classes at the same time, which did not improve his disposition. Besides, he had a real goat for an experimental animal, and goats are notoriously hard on the nervous system. This particular animal, at the moment the scientists entered, was straining at his rope, trying to get a mouthful of a tablecloth which graced a nearby table full of jars and retorts. Failing this, the goat exhibited that typical lack of discrimination in matters edible and began to chew on his rope. I felt a little out of place among all these giant brains. My reason for being there was that I had been serving, during my college career, as sort of factotum or fetch-and-carry man for Dr. Angstrom, and I was to take notes for him. I had acquired considerable affection for the old goat. Maybe that's one reason I hate to see his great scientific work kept under wraps, because people still insist it's dangerous. I have proved to my own satisfaction that the matter transmitter works, Dr. Angstrom told the assembled scientists. I have made a number of transmissions of inanimate matter. In theory, it should work just as well for animate objects, and I have invited you to be present at the first test of this theory. I need not go into detail with you about the basic theory of matter transmission. The transmitter itself picks up the atomic and electronic image of the object inside it, much as a television scanner picks up a scene, except that this is done in 3 dimensions instead of 2. This is made possible by the 4-dimensional element, which is the heart of the apparatus, and was made available to us through recent intra-atomic research. The receiver picks up the image as a television receiver does, except again in 3 dimensions. The matter is not duplicated because the transmitter strips down the object within it as it transmits. Now, the question that has been raised by some scientists about the transmission of animate objects is whether the soul or life force can be transmitted. I consider this question ridiculous and will prove it so. It is my contention that such life force is not a thing apart from the physical shell. The matter transmitter was a large closed cylinder on one side of the room. The receiver was a similar cylinder on the other. Both were raised slightly from the floor. As sort of hors d'oeuvre, Dr. Angstrom transmitted a large chunk of lead across the room, then a glass jar. In each case, the object was placed in the transmitter and a moment later removed from the receiver across the room. There was no possible way for it to have been moved across the intervening space except by broadcast transmission. As you see, said Dr. Angstrom, I have eliminated the necessity for a switch by building the switch into the door of the transmitter. As soon as the door is closed, transmission occurs. Now we shall send our animate object. He untied the goat and with some difficulty hauled the animal by its collar to the transmitter. There the goat balked, and Dr. Angstrom, having got his head through the door, got behind it and shoved heartily, hanging onto the edge of the door so he could shut it quickly when the goat was inside. As goats will, the goat suddenly changed its mind and leapt into the transmitter. Caught off balance, Dr. Angstrom fell in after it, and the door, given a last frantic jerk, slammed on them both. There were gasps of horror and alarm from the scientists, but I held up my hand to calm them. "There's no danger, gentlemen," I said. "It's just as well this way. I happen to know that Dr. Angstrom's next step, after proving to you with the goat that animate objects would be transmitted, was to prove that human beings also could be transmitted. He planned to be his own first subject." With serene confidence, I went to the receiver and threw open the door. Just as I anticipated, the goat leaped out, unharmed, followed by Dr. Angstrom. "I told you animate objects could be transmitted successfully," said the goat triumphantly. "Bah!" said Dr. Angstrom, and began eating the tablecloth. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Guest Expert by Alan Kim Lang. Originally published in Planet Stories, January 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Earth had a problem, and the Martian visitor had a very deadly means of solving it. "I'm only here to help you," said the man from Mars. "You've proved that," the secretary admitted. "In the 6 weeks that you've been here, you've wiped out rabies, measles, and the common cold. But, sir, this latest proposal of yours is blasphemous." The man from Mars waved an appendage in the direction of the secretary's desk, atop which a newspaper was lying open. "After reading what that paper has to say, can you still doubt that what I propose is necessary?" The young man in uniform crossed the room and picked up the newspaper. He read the headlines aloud, bitterly. "Indian Famine Army storms New Delhi. Tasman Republic bids for place in sun. Plague decimates Lower Nile." "You could end that plague," the assistant's voice was accusing. "I could, of course. The battles and the starvation would still be with you, though. Why do you persist in treating the symptoms instead of the sickness? I am an objective observer, far enough away from your problems to see them clearly, something which no human can ever hope to do. You earthlings suffer war and famine and plague for one reason only, that there are 4 8/10 billions of you living on an earth which can feed only about 2.5 billion of you well. Gentlemen, the population of your planet must be reduced by 1/2 if your race is to survive." "Couldn't we send our surplus population to Mars or to Venus?" the assistant asked. The man from Mars winced. "The sands of Mars can't support cactuses, much less fields of wheat and rice and corn. Venus is a solid sea or formaldehyde solution." He glanced around to each of the 3 men in the room. "To you, my scheme may seem heartless. But would it be more cruel to kill millions now than to allow billions to die in continual war in the next 1,000 years? Do you remember your last such war? The Ukrainian wheatlands scorched to desert by the thermonuclears. New England swept by epidemics of anthrax and tularemia. All China tortured by starvation and the 100 nagging sicknesses that follow hunger. Yes, I remember." The secretary rolled his pen between his fingers, staring at it. "How do you intend to liquidate the excess 2 billions? "I can't explain it to you. You lack the basic knowledge. It will be quick and painless, though, I promise. Then Earth will see peace and hope, a new start." "I couldn't take all the responsibility for this decision upon myself," the secretary said. He glanced hopefully toward the assistant and the young man in uniform. Their eyes flinched away. "You might take a vote," suggested the man from Mars. He picked up the secretary's scratch pad and ripped off 3 sheets of paper. "Just mark yes or no. I will respect your decision. After all, I'm only here to help you." The secretary stared at the slip of paper lying on his desk. He glanced toward the other 2 humans for encouragement, but the assistant was staring at the wall across the room, and the young man in uniform was silently contemplating the carpet at his feet. Convulsively, the secretary scooched the paper toward him and scribbled his vote. Folding the paper, he looked demandingly toward his 2 companions. The young man in uniform looked up, then turned to hold his paper against the wall as he wrote his decision. The assistant remained seated, holding the paper on top of a book while he lettered out his vote. The man from Mars collected the 3 ballots, unfolded them, and read the 3 votes. "It's 2-1, he announced. He crushed the papers into small white pellets and tossed them out the open window. "What I have to do will be finished by noon tomorrow." The man from Mars left the room, closing the door very softly behind him. The other 3 sat silent a moment, then got up and left without looking one another in the face. The next day, the secretary and the assistant sat in the office, staring at the clock above the door. At 12:07, the door slammed open for the young man in uniform. "Is it done?" the assistant asked. "Done? Of course it's done." The young man in uniform leaned against the door and shook with spasmodic laughter. "Now there's food enough and room enough for everyone. The man from Mars promised to solve our population problem. He did. At 12 noon, Eastern Daylight Saving Time, every woman and girl on Earth dropped dead." The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Utopia? Never! By Thomas M. Disch. Originally published in Amazing Stories, August 1963. Narrated by Tom Trussel. "But I assure you," his guide replied. "There's always a fly in the ointment," the visitor continued. "Injustice is part of human nature. A society can't do without it." "These are special conditions." "That is the first injustice. Other planets don't have gobblers." "But they do." "It's not the same thing. You've seen the gobbler fleece from Morpheus 9. It's no better than wool. Only here in New Katanga—" "Utopia," his guide corrected. "Only here is their fleece as tough as iron." "And soft to the touch as watered silk," his guide sighed deeply. Truly, there was nothing like gobbler fleece. "Your planet's prosperity is possible, however, only at the expense of Federation worlds that can't raise gobblers." "True," his guide agreed wanly. "If New Katanga would reveal to the Federation the secret of the gobbler fleece, the special process you have developed here, I assure you—" "On your right," his guide pointed out, "you will observe our new civic auditorium, renowned throughout the galaxy for the classic beauty of its proportions." "I assure you that I would not be so apt to suspect the motive of your utopian pretensions." "Each panel of the glass wall is in the ratio 2:3. The sculpture in the centre of the fountain was executed at enormous expense by Bernd Thorwald the Terran, who was since naturalized. It is an allegory of peace, prosperity, and freedom." The visitor grunted. "Perhaps it is necessary, as you suggest, for a utopia to be isolated to a certain degree. We do enjoy advantages here that are wanting on— What did you say your homeworld is called?" "Aridity 6. "Just so. Yet our chief advantage is not our monopoly on gobbler fleece, but the perfection of our social institutions. Here there is no crime, no war, no politics, no hunger, and little disease. Our utopians are not greedy, envious, wrathful, lazy, or bedevilled with lusts." "Come again. Every night there's a line outside my bedroom door, 5 deep. Not that I object, but in the land of the pure it seems a strange thing." His guide tried to conceal his smile. "It is because you are a visitor. A certain romantic charm attaches to your peculiar position, an aura. On the whole, our citizens are more moderate in their appetites. Puritanism, too, is a shortcoming." "You have been enjoying your stay, I take it?" "Oh, yes." "The food?" "Excellent. I must have gained 30 pounds. His guide nodded appreciatively at the visitor's girth. "You will find, as you grow accustomed to plenty, that even moderation has its pleasures. But I will not make sermons. Have you enjoyed the weather?" "Just the right amount of zip. Your engineers are geniuses." "Our schools and hospitals, our roads and public buildings?" "In all those things you are the paragon of the galaxy, and the private homes that I have seen are models of restrained munificence." "They were selected at random." "Of course. I knew long before my visit that your artists and scientists—" "Virtually the whole population," his guide put in, "are without peer." "And yet you deny us the title of Utopia." "Utopia? Never!" the visitor said adamantly. "There's always a worm in the rose. I just have not found it yet, but it's there. Injustice is a part of human nature." "What a shame. I had hoped that you would accept full citizenship." "Full cit—" the visitor gasped, letting his £280 settle slowly into a teakwood parch bench. Yes, but since... Show me the papers. But as a representative of the Federation... I renounce Federation citizenship. What do I sign? Here, and here, and here. Good. He tucked the papers into a small leather carrying case. It seems to me that, with such a permissive an immigration policy, New Katanga will soon be overrun. On the contrary, exclusivity would be unjust and, in the long run, unprofitable. A society always can use fresh blood. Besides, we have a stable population rate, all things considered. Well, I feel like celebrating. Why don't we take in the matinee performance at the auditorium, then? Admission, like everything else in Utopia, is free. The performances are quite hair-raising, something on the order of the Roman circus, I'm told. The new citizen raised an eyebrow. In Utopia? It's a healthy outlet for our small aggressions. They walked up the marble staircase to the grand circle. Would you wait for me a few minutes in my box? I have some things to attend to. The visitor entered the box through a great door, heavily crusted with gold. His seat afforded him an excellent view of the arena. All the Utopians in the tiers above and across from his box stopped chattering and turned as one man to gaze at him. The new citizen recognized several women of recent acquaintance and waved to them. They waved back. One kissed her sheer gobbler fleece scarf and threw it toward him. It billowed in the warm air of the auditorium and sank gracefully to the floor of the arena. There was restrained applause. The lights dimmed. The entrance gates at the far end of the arena opened with a clank. The gobblers bounded out with that curious lithe motion so strange in creatures of their bulk. They circled the arena and came to a stop underneath the new citizen's box, where, lips pressed back from their terrible fangs, they mewled softly. With an almost imperceptible click, the box was disengaged from its moorings and swung free over the arena. Then with slow pendular motions it descended to the floor. The audience cheered wildly as the gobblers leaped like great maned antelopes over the railing of the box and tore the new citizen of Utopia into shreds. Even as they gulped down the huge chunks of fatty tissue, the spectator could see their fleece change from a tone of drab nickel to a sheen something between the glint of polished steel and the shimmer of watered silk. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Birthday Present by Arnold Marmor, originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, July 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Diane's husband spent most of his time on Mars, and I spent most of mine with Diane. It was a nice arrangement, much too nice to last. "It's tonight or never," Diane said. "Yes," I said. I watched her as she walked back and forth across my bedroom floor. She had on a sheer plasto dress that clung to her round white breasts and full milky thighs. "I'm picking you up at the Spaceway," she said. "We're supposed to go dining and dancing tonight." She stopped pacing. "It's my birthday. I'm 30 today." And I was 24 and in love. 6 years between us. So what? I didn't give a damn. I wanted to marry her, to live with her. "I'm 30, she said again. "Do you mind?" "I know your age. Why bring it up?" "Some day you'll find out you married an old woman, if we ever do marry." "Stop it." I got off the bed, went to her. "Just tell me what to do and I'll do it." "Do you love me?" She looked up at me. "You know I do." "Say it." "I love you." "Never stop saying that." She put up her face and I kissed her. A long, hard kiss. She broke away. "You'll be back in the racer. Just crouch low. As soon as we're away from the spaceway, you hit him with a wrench. It has to be quick and sure. Then we can carry him up to the apartment and drop him out the window." I shuddered a little as she talked. She was so calm about the whole thing. "You'll have plenty of time to get out. It'll be listed as a suicide. He's been sick for a long time. His doctor will testify to that. He was so sick and worried he jumped to his death." She stared at me hard. "Is it all clear?" "Yes." I looked at her. Her long blonde hair, her oval face, the slim white column that was her throat. "It's all clear, like glass." I poured myself a drink. I needed it. I was going to need a lot more. "We won't be able to see each other for a long time," she said. She watched me drink. "We don't want to give our friends something to talk about." "I won't like not seeing you." She patted my face. I put down my drink, caged her slender hand in mine, and kissed her wrist. I saw the light blue veins crisscrossing under the delicate skin. I brought her close to me. I kissed her warm lips. "Baby," I breathed. "Diane, baby." "Paul, listen to me. We haven't much time." "All right, sweet." I kissed her again. "Come on, we can't afford to get there late." I crouched low in the back of the racer. I heard the street noises, the gab of the night crowds, the not-so-mild cursings of the taxi-jet drivers. It all seemed so unreal. Back there on my haunches, a wrench gripped tight in my sweaty hand. I was going to kill a man I knew, a man I respected. And for a woman, all for a woman. I thought about getting up and telling Diane to go to hell and to get herself another stooge. I thought about a lot of things. Then I thought of Diane, her sweet white body, the way she sighed when I kissed her hard, and I knew I was going to go through with it. The racer stopped. Its jets cut off. I heard the hum as the door opened and she got out. This was it. I sweated. It dripped down in an endless stream. The seconds went by, then the minutes. They got in, and the door hummed shut, and I heard their laughter blending together. They settled back, and the jets roared. The racer woke up to a new life, and it shot away. "How was the trip?" I heard Diane asking. "Cold, and I'm not sure it was worth it. Those Martians drive a hard bargain." He coughed. "Diane, you're not too set on going out tonight, are you?" "Why?" she asked. "I thought how nice it would be if we spent the evening at home." "Just as you say, Roger." "You don't care?" "Of course not." She was so calm, so damn calm. There would never be another like Diane. "You won't regret it," Roger promised. "My, but this boulevard is deserted," she said. "Not a soul in sight." That was for my benefit. It was my cue. I sat up silently. He saw me then in the rear-view mirror. "What the hell?" He started to turn. My arm sprang alive. The wrench thudded against his skull. A half-cry spilled from his lips. Then his head fell forward on his chest. "Hit him again," Diane urged. "But do as I say." I hit him again, hard. It was done. I settled back. The wrench was still in my hand. I looked at it, then let it fall. "Are you all right?" Diane asked. "Yes," I said. "Why shouldn't I be?" "You're not going to be sick, are you?" "No. You think I'm a kid?" "You did it for an old woman." "Stop it." "Today is my birthday, don't you know? I'm 30. "Shut up." "I wonder what he got for my birthday." "Please." "I'm sorry. Really I am. I feel like talking. If I don't, I think I'd scream." So I let her talk. I didn't answer her. She babbled away like she was crazy. She kept it up till we got to their apartment. Diane got out first and made sure the way was clear. "We'll use the back stairs," she said when she got back. "We both can manage him." It was dark and it was late, and we didn't see anybody. We went through the service entrance. It was too heavy a load for me to do it alone. 2 flights up. Diane helped me with him. I breathed easier when we were in the marble hall outside the apartment. She quickly unlocked the heavy plastic door, and we got him inside. She fumbled for the inner lighting switch. "Happy birthday!" they shouted. Now I knew why Roger had wanted to spend the evening at home. We stood there, Diane and myself, with Roger between us. Then they stopped shouting and stared at us. I thought they would never stop staring. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Earth Has Gone to the Dogs by William J. McClellan. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, October 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Ruskin leaned back and yawned. The porch chair creaked comfortably. It was a comfortable day. 50 yards away, the barnyard was alive with spring noises. Clean, crisp smells floated to him through the bright morning air. Daisy walked slowly up and watched him with big, affectionate eyes. Ruskin smiled down at her. She was a pretty one, pretty soft hair, deep blue eyes, lithe, rounded lines. "Nice doggy." He patted her head gently. "Nice doggy," he repeated. Holidays in the country came too seldom. The quiet was wonderful. Tom, the wrinkled little farmhand, opened the porch door. "Mr. Ruskin?" "Yes, Tom." "Man here to see you." "Who?" "That digger fellow." Ruskin frowned and swore quietly. Even his holidays were shattered by people who couldn't forget he was Commissioner of Internal Security. And these people were always little unimportant ones, like this archaeologist Bigelow, whose little fears suddenly became giant threats to national security. "Send him out here, Tom." Tom turned back into the house. Ruskin could hear his gruff voice inside, and a few moments later Bigelow, stooped and bespectacled, emerged from the house. Ruskin smiled weakly. "Hello, Bigelow." "Good morning, Commissioner." Bigelow stood, clutching his briefcase, shaking with excitement. Then suddenly his eyes fell on Daisy, and something like fear passed over his face. "Sit down, Bigelow." Bigelow balanced himself delicately on the edge of a porch chair, his briefcase resting on his long bony knees, but his eyes remained fixed on the dog. "Is this social or business, Bigelow?" "Sort of both, Commissioner," he answered slowly, then added quickly, "But I wouldn't disturb your holiday if it wasn't important." Ruskin nodded dully. Then several moments of silence, during which Bigelow continued to watch Daisy carefully. Finally, since his visitor did not seem inclined to speak, Ruskin asked simply, "Well?" "First, tell the dog to go away." "Daisy?" "Yes." "Why?" "I won't say a word with it here." Ruskin shrugged. "As you wish," he said. "Daisy, go on. Go on, like a good girl." Daisy's big eyes seemed hurt, but reluctantly she walked away. Bigelow watched suspiciously after her until she was well out of hearing. "Now," he began, "a week ago we started digging around the crater on the east coast where some great pre-atomic cities once stood." Bigelow paused excitedly. Ruskin sighed. It was much too nice a day. "And there we came upon 3 pre-atomic books." Bigelow paused again. "A wonderful find," Ruskin said without enthusiasm. "More wonderful than you can think, Commissioner." Bigelow squared his shoulders dramatically. 2 of them were much like the other pre-atomic books in the museums, but the 3rd... Bigelow was bursting with excitement. "The 3rd had pictures in it." Ruskin straightened up. "Amazing." Never before had a pre-atomic book been found with pictures. Artists had painted their own versions drawn from the few meagre written descriptions. "How many pictures, Bigelow?" "Plenty, but just one would be enough to shake the foundations of our social world." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a small book protected by its own cloth cover. He opened to a marked page. "Just take a look at this." Ruskin took the book and stared curiously at a picture showing a dressed-up dog sitting in a chair patting a human on the head. The caption read, "Man's best friend gets reward." Ruskin glanced back at Bigelow. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "Is it some kind of joke book?" Bigelow grinned narrowly. "A very bitter joke, Commissioner. A joke of Mother Nature's." "I'm still not sure I understand." "I think you do, Commissioner," Bigelow countered quickly. "Now so many of the things we couldn't understand become clear to us. The naked animal on the floor in the picture is our ancestor, and the hairless thing in the chair is our dog." Ruskin shook his head. "Impossible." "Not at all. In the lower animal and plant orders, more amazing mutations occurred during the atomic wars. We just never noticed because they didn't touch us closely." Ruskin's mind rushed over the implications, all the frightful and carefully ignored aberrations of the atomic blasts. If it was true, and he still wouldn't let himself be convinced, it would be a tremendous blow to the morale of society, and it was his duty to protect the well-being of society. He must decide, now, for society. "This is a very delicate problem, Bigelow," he said finally. "I know, Commissioner." "You've come upon something fantastic." "Thank you, Commissioner." "We must handle this very carefully." "I understand." "Good. Leave the book with me, for security reasons, and I'll figure how to handle it." "Well?" "Of course, I'll see that you get all the credit you deserve." Bigelow rose. "Very well, Commissioner. I'll leave it in your hands." He left with the air of a man just conquering the world. Ruskin sat, the closed book in both hands, for a long, long while. It was very late when he called the Psycho section. "Yes," Psycho answered. "We have a file on Bigelow." "Have you ever interned him?" "No, but he's catalogued as extremely unstable." "Fine. Thank you." Ruskin placed the receiver carefully back on the cradle. Nothing to fear from Bigelow. He rose and walked slowly toward the fire. He looked down at the book. War, war, war. From the beginning of man almost to his own destruction. Since the atomic wars, Earth had been comparatively peaceful, because people thought man had become surfeit of war. Ruskin frowned. Attitudes, someone had once said, are more important than facts. He dropped the book into the flames. Very well, then. Let Earth be happy. Daisy walked slowly over to him and barked quietly. The pretty golden hair hung gently over her shoulders, and her blue eyes were very soft. Ruskin patted her gently. "Nice doggy," he said. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Homecoming Horde by Robert Silverberg. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, August 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The room was sealed as tightly as possible. Haverford had checked it for cracks, made sure the windows were corked, and now kept constant guard. He was alone. He could never tell when the alien invaders would break through. I must be nearly the last, he thought. It was strange, this feeling of being alone on Earth, but it was probably true. The aliens had come 6 days before. Haverford remembered picking up their ultimatum on his ham set. "Earthmen, the Lanthai are coming, beware!" That was all it had been, an ominous warning, rather than a threat or an order. The way the message had been worded, it left little doubt that they were conquerors from space. Haverford had been amused at first. A solitary recluse, he had had little dealings with his fellow men, at least not in person. The costly ham set that occupied nearly a third of his one-room flat was his sole contact. Through radio, he kept in regular touch with friends in Yokohama and Buenos Aires, Texas and Oregon, while actually leaving the confines of his own room at increasingly rare intervals. He had, naturally, picked up the Lanthai messages on his set. There wasn't an amateur operator in the world that hadn't detected them. That was when he began to feel it wasn't a joke. Reports came in. Dazo Osaki, the Japanese contact, reported hearing the strange message. Lionel Bentham in Sussex picked it up also, as did Miguel Patriona in Buenos Aires. "Earthmen, the Lanthai are coming, beware!" Someone, there was no doubt of it, was beaming the message at the entire Earth from outside. And then the Lanthai had come. Haverford, pacing his room nervously, remembered the day of their landing. He had been talking to Bentham, the Englishman, a slow-speaking, phlegmatic sort. "So I mean to write to my man in Parliament, and ask him to plump for the legislation. It'll be a great boon for ham operators if— Lord, what's that? What's that?" Haverford had stared at the transmitter in shocked surprise as Bentham's voice was replaced with a screeching of static, then some other sounds he did not understand, followed by a quick, sharp, repulsive clicking and— silence. "Bentham! Bentham!" Silence. That had been the beginning. The Lanthai had landed all right. The alien invaders were sweeping the world. Haverford got the details from a news broadcast. They had come in silvery ships, hundreds of them, thousands. "You should have seen it," Bartirone told him, speaking in his accented English. "All over Buenos Aires, in midday. Suddenly the sky was blotted out. Ships, silvery ships. They seemed small. They started to land." "Have you seen the invaders yourself?" "No, not yet. They haven't come this far west in the city yet, but—" The Argentinian's voice stopped. Haverford listened numbly, knowing despite himself exactly what had happened. The invaders had come. He rose, looked around his room. He had enough food in the freezer and on the shelves to last for months. Haverford was a frugal man. By buying in quantity, he saved precious cash that was used for augmenting the radio set. He decided to hide in his home, to seal it from the outside world, to wait. Perhaps the invaders would be driven back. Perhaps Earth would fall, but he would be safe. He would not be killed in the war of conquest. He made sure there was no way his room could be entered. Just as he was about to nail fast the bolt that held the door shut, he heard knocking. 3 sharp knocks. Haverford leapt for the bolt, drove it home, hung tensely against the door. "Who is it?" he asked. "Mrs. Kelly," came the reply. He almost fainted from relief. He had expected the aliens, and it was only the landlady. Cautiously, he threw open the door. "Yes?" "Have you heard, Mr. Haverford? About the invasion, I mean." "Yes, I've heard. What of it?" "I just thought I'd tell you," she said, shrugging. "I know you don't go out much or read the papers, and I thought maybe—" "I've heard over the radio," he told her stiffly. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" "No, not at all." "Very well, then. If anyone comes to see me, you can tell them I'm not looking for visitors." "Yes, Mr. Haverford." She disappeared into the darkness of the corridor. Haverford slammed the door, shot the bolt home, nailed it fast. So far as the outside world was concerned, he was as good as dead. He set to work sealing himself in. 2 days passed. 2 days in which gradually, one by one, his contacts here and there over the globe were silenced. Bentham had gone first, then Bartirona. His 2 Japanese friends were gone now too. The Orient was overrun by the invaders. South America as well. Word was coming from the states of alien advances. New York was in Lanthai hands, and no broadcasts were being made from there. The United Nations delegates had fled to an unnamed city and were continuing to talk, to discuss the situation, no doubt, Haverford thought bitterly. But talk would do no good. Soon the entire world would be in alien hands, and there would be no stopping them, none at all. Texas went. Oregon. The aliens were obviously working their way toward the center of North America. So far, Chicago had reported no alien attacks, but United States forces in the seacoast state had been driven back. Haverford ate his frozen foods sparingly and spent long hours at the radio. One by one, his contacts were snuffed out. He ran down the lists in a code book, calling people he hadn't buzzed in years, just trying to hear human voices again. "Come in, W3XFA! Come in, W3XFA!" No answer. None at all. The aliens held all of Asia, most of Europe. He got a brief response from Belgium on the 3rd day, but was unable to pick up the signal an hour later. An underground worker in an Iron Curtain country called him that afternoon, and then he went. The marauders from space covered the globe. Haverford looked at his map. They were working in an ever-tightening ring. Soon they would be in Chicago. Then the strength of his improvised fortress would be sorely tested. By the 4th day, he was down to just one contact, a man in Upper Illinois, a ham operator out of a Chicago suburb. "You there, Haverford?" "I'm here. What do you hear?" "Nothing. The aliens are everywhere. I can see them from my window, swarming in the streets. They've won all right. Mankind is defeated." "You can see them, eh? Must be a ghastly sight." Haverford's own window faced the back. "It is. There must be millions of the ugly beasts and not a human being in sight. Haverford, whoever expected it would come like this?" "No one did. No one ever dreamed of it." "They must breed fantastically rapidly if they can send an invasion force of this size. Imagine it, Haverford, a living tide of Lanthai spilling out from their home world, covering all of the universe and—" "Yes, I hear you," Haverford said. "Something outside my door. It's them, Haverford, it's them!" The set went dead. Haverford stared dully at it for a moment, then turned it off. There was no one else to talk to. He was alone. He was the last survivor, unless there was someone else, cowering in a skyscraper basement somewhere, hiding in a thick field of corn. But the Lanthai were methodical killers. They had set out to exterminate the human race and— Haverford stiffened. What was that scrabbling, scratching noise in the hall? It sounded like— He knew what it was. The Lanthai were coming. They were wiping out the stragglers now, the few like Haverford who had remained alive. They were wiping the earth clean of life, leaving it bare and ready for them. The scraping at the door grew louder. The bolt strained. The hinges started to give. Haverford watched coldly, knowing that he hadn't done the job well enough. They were going to be able to get through. A dark line appeared down the center of his door. It began to crack. It yielded. Haverford turned frantically to his radio set, desperately sending out a call for help. But of course, nobody heard him. Nobody answered. He was alone, and he knew it. Except for them. He wheeled to face them, to go down fighting. He looked in horror at them. Insects, huge, ugly, and alien. They came on. He backed to the wall, and in the last moment, as time seemed to stand still, he became aware of an insignificant detail, laughable, yet tragically ironic. A fly buzzed around his head, an earth fly, a pitiful creature, a nothing, an insect. The fly lighted on the floor a few feet ahead of him, crawling slowly toward the alien horde pouring through the door. And the aliens broke their ranks, passing around the fly almost respectfully, he thought. Or was it paternally? Then they reached him. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Task 2 Luna by Alfred Coppel. Originally published in Planet Stories, January 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The rockets started almost simultaneously. From two widely separated points on the great curving surface of Earth they reached upward and outward toward the moon. It wasn't really so strange a coincidence. Space navigation is governed by mathematics and logic, not politics. The fact that man-carrying spaceships happened to be developed concurrently on two sides of an iron curtain meant little to the universe. It happened, that's all. And there is a proper time to launch such missiles. When that time came, they were launched. In a manner of speaking, it was a race wherein the prizes were such things as gravity gauge and surveillance point and impregnable launching sites. The contestants were earnest, capable men, each certain that the moon must not fall into the hands of the opponent. It made a stirring and patriotic picture, vivid with nationalistic fervour. It was thrilling with its taste of high adventure and self-sacrifice. For each rocket pilot it was a personal crusade against the thing he had been raised to regard as the enemy. But somehow, under the steady, cold scrutiny of the eternal stars, they must have looked a little ridiculous, perhaps just a tiny bit tragic too. Harsh was the moon. There was black and there was white. Great jagged cliffs and razor-backed mountains slashed the pocket surface of the crater floor, humping themselves at the huge unwinking stars. The sun was a stark disk of fire, incredibly white, hung in the black sky. The shadows were bottomless pools. Within them there was nothing. In the sunlight, the pumice soil glared white. The Russian rocket had crashed on landing. Randick could see the tiny buckled shape of it high on the mountain. No doubt the pilot was dead, but he had to be sure. The risks were too great for any unsupported assumptions. He had to go up there and see for himself. Ponderous in his pressure suit, Randick emerged from the open lock of the Anglo-American rocket. He slogged across the pumice of the crater floor toward the spot where the mountain's sheer talus erupted skyward. If there were no trouble from the Ruskie, he would return to his own ship and begin setting up the first cell of what would soon be the Anglo-American moon base. As soon as he signaled a safe landing and no opposition from the Russian, other rockets would come to add their cells, and presently there would be an atomic rocket pointed dead at the heart of every Russian population center. A rocket each for Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, Vladivostok. Randick frowned. It would be a lot simpler if the crash had finished the Russian pilot. He knew the Russians had exactly the same plan for the moon. Only the rockets would be aimed at Washington, London, Paris, San Francisco. The slight weight of the one-man bazooka on Randick's back seemed suddenly very comforting. Randick knew himself to be on the very edge of known territory. His map showed him that he was in the highest part of the Durfel Mountains. Behind him lay the two great bowls of Bailey and Schickard, and far to the north he could see, as he climbed higher, the smooth surface of the Mare Humorum. He looked up to the spine-like ridge beyond, and slightly above the wreck of the Russian ship. There was a deep pass that slashed like a wound into the backbone of the range. He felt a slight thrill. Beyond that cleft lay mystery. The other side of the moon. The sun's rays beat down brutally. Even through the heavily insulated suit, Randick could feel their searing touch. All around him stretched a jumbled nightmare of black and white. He was suddenly very glad that he could not see the earth in the sky. The homesickness would be unbearable. Randick found himself frowning. He had no time for such thoughts. He was a soldier. He reminded himself that up there in the tangled wreckage of the Russian spaceship there might be another soldier ready to kill him. 2 human beings on the moon, each eager to kill. Randick shook his head angrily. He had no right to let his mind dwell on such things. He was within 100 yards of the wreck when a streak of fire and a soundless blast drove him into the shadows. Pumice showered him from the star-shaped depression where the explosive missile had struck. Randick cursed heartily. The Ruskie was very much alive, and there wasn't a thing wrong with his eyesight. The shot had been uncomfortably close. Unslinging his bazooka, Randick began to work his way around behind the Russian rocket. A slight movement among the wreckage caught his trained eye, and he launched a projectile at it. It flared wickedly, tearing fragments of metal loose and flinging them fantastic distances down the sheer slope of the ridge. There was no return fire. Randick broke out of the shadow and ran for the cover of a large pumice-stone boulder farther up the draw. A sun-bright flash of fire splattered the loose soil a dozen feet from him. He slid for the darkness on his belly. That one had been a near thing. Behind the boulder lay a trench-like depression that sloped away up the draw toward the pass. Randick dropped it and began to crawl laboriously upward. If he could flank the Ruskie, he could finish this with one good shot. Another explosion rocked the boulder he had just left. Randick didn't even look back. He felt his breath rasping in his throat, and his body felt hot and sticky inside the bulky pressure suit. Glancing down and to his right, he could see the proudly erect shape of his own rocket far below on the floor of the crater. It took him almost 30 minutes to reach the edge of the shadow that spilled from the side of the mountain pass. To his left, not 10 feet away, was the sudden white glare of the pumice floor. He was well above and almost behind the wreck of the Russian's ship. His flanks were heaving with the exertion of the climb as he searched the buckled mass of the crash for his opponent. There seemed to be a dark shape wedged in between 2 twisted bulkheads. It looked like a man. With pounding heart, Randick murmured a prayer and lifted his bazooka, aimed and pressed the firing stud. The shadow vanished in silent white fire. The return blast almost knocked him down. For a moment Randick was stunned, wondering foggily where the shot had come from. Then his brain cleared and he realized that the Ruskie too had climbed to the pass, leaving Randick to fire at shadows. Randick cursed himself for his dangerous stupidity. The other must be among those shadowy rocks directly across the bright floor of the pass. He raised his bazooka carefully, searching the Stygian blackness for some sign of movement. His finger curled around the firing stud. Out of the corner of his eye he saw the flare. The Russian rocket erupted in a gout of bluish flame, and the whole mountain seemed to rock. Randick stared stupidly at the glowing crater where the ship had been. For just an instant he thought that perhaps a meteorite had struck it, but the explosion had been unquestionably atomic. The Russian must have been stunned too, for he moved out into the light, empty-handed, his helmet turned woodenly toward the rapidly cooling lake of magma where his spaceship had been. They both saw the bright arc of fire that raced up from beyond the ridge and curved down gracefully toward the floor of the crater far below. Open-mouthed, Randick watched his ship vanish into flame, and he felt the vague tremor of the ground under him as the shock rumbled across the face of the moon. The Russian rocket was gone. The Anglo-American rocket was gone. Moonbase was gone before it had ever been. The weapon fell from Randick's hand, and he stepped unsteadily into the light toward the Russian. Suddenly, human companionship was very, very important. Panicky terror was plucking at his throat. The two men stumbled toward each other across a path cut deep into the jagged back of the Durfell Mountains. As one, they turned and looked out across the vast expanse of the moon's hidden face. They were soldiers. They knew an invasion base when they saw one. As far as the eye could see, lines of sleek mammoth spaceships of unknown design stretched away into the distance. The face of the vast unnamed mare was covered with them. Suddenly Randick felt himself beginning to giggle. He tried to stop, but the laughter welled up inside of him, echoing wildly within his confining helmet. He could see that the Russian was laughing too, white teeth gleaming behind the plexiglass faceplate. They laughed until they gasped. Their sides hurt with laughter. Tears rolled down their faces. They were arm in arm and still laughing when the third rocket arced down on them from out of the black and star-flecked sky. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The Legacy by Dick Hank. Originally published in Amazing Stories, August 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The Great War ended, the land cooled, and the dawn came. The sun's red rays moved north and south as shadows pointed west. The eastern sky brightened white as shadows shimmered shorter. The last man watched the shadows move as day began again. He saw around him rubble sent by man in progress ended. The remnants near, void of shape, purpose lost in flaming heat. A desert made by man's great flight to moon and stars unreached. The sun moved up, piercing haze, cloudless, blueless, quiet. The brightness grew, not much at first, and wastelands showed their wares. Depression came, the last man moved toward the peace of purpose. No friend was left, of this he knew, but man had left a legacy. O universe, you stay intact, and yet my earth is ruined. Earth within the solar womb, aborted now and dying. What is there now to write on stone, when ground contains thy bones? The last man walked down dusty roads, bounded there by mortar brick. To his right a farmland once, no rooster crowed to wake the harvest. The house once white, with red barn near, was ground and dust by cattle hoof. He crossed a bridge that stayed intact, and looked below at floating flesh. Blood once red had turned to brown, as did the once green land. The road moved on, he followed course, remembering the beauty. Beauty then, but now it passed, as scent became a rotting thing. The dust moved up as foot came down, and thought he did of burning. No atom left by flames intense, no atom but the dust he tread. O friends below, he spoke in passing, pardon my traversing. I cannot see how other roads could leave me less offending, unless, of course, the road I chose is dusted with thy enemy. The road moved east, bounded there by lamp-posts melted. The last man walked, his shadow pointed, on and on to city crumbled. The building there shorter now, but that was as it should be. No one was left that stood above, to rule and litter lesser ones. The air moved thick with activeness. The last man knew its purpose. Death was near, of this he knew, but purpose had he also. Find he would the truth of man, his legacy of living. Men lived here, but now man walked, in search of purpose written. Those that come, the last man spoke, must know of man, his greatness. The last man searched each crater now for treasures saved from burning. He finished this as shadows searched, moving east in passing. The last man walked, his treasure gathered, found a bank and entered it. He walked amid the roofless thing, shaded some by walls still standing. He reached the vault and stepped inside. Each treasure found was taken too. He placed each one by walls of steel, closed the door and locked it tight. Man must have a legacy, and on the wall he wrote, "Gathered here are works of man, that you that come may know him. The name of each," the last man writes, "the item lays beneath it. Coke bottles, golf balls, lipstick cases, powder puffs, soda straws, nurses' shoes, prophylactics, aerosols, hi-fi records, cowboy boots, living bras, and neon signs. The man in dying took one sign and placed it by itself. Alone it stood in reverence. Above it were these words, "Jesus saves," this one says, but failed to tell us how. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And don't forget to check out the channel. There's hundreds of stories. Hundreds of stories.